training are the parts that I wrote, okay? And if you are enjoying the fact that you're attending a university which requires you to study a foreign language and pass a foreign language proficiency exit requirement, you can thank me for that, because I'm the one that got that into the curriculum. When the combined faculty senates of the CSU system met in Pacific Grove in 1982, I think, I was the one that made the argument for the passage of those things, and I essentially suggested to the audience that you would like to have your students learn a language from some other part of the world so that they can speak to their employees, or more likely that they can speak to their employer, or to speak to the person who owns the mortgage on their house, okay? And for some reason they thought that was funny and they voted to accept it. I started out my training as a geography major at the University of California, Berkeley, and not because I really understood geography, but because my father was an engineer, and my uncle was an engineer, and they all had slide rules, and they scared me half to death with their math. And so to get into Berkeley, you have to have a major. So I took geography. It was a fortunate choice because I was assigned an advisor, and my advisor was a man named Paul Wheatley, an Englishman who just arrived on campus from Singapore, and is the author of a famous book called The Golden Chersonese, which is a cultural history of the Malay Peninsula, and one of the founding architects of modern Southeast Asian analysis. Now, normally undergraduate students at Berkeley never actually get to meet faculty, and they more normally study with graduate students. But Professor Wheatley had just arrived on campus, and he decided that I should help him find where the library was and do all sorts of other things. So he very kindly let me hang around his office, and he'd explain things to me. And it's from that point that I developed an interest in Southeast Asia. I was at Berkeley in the hopes of getting a scholarship, since my family was poor, and I was enrolled in the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is run by the Navy. I was a successful midshipman and was offered a full scholarship, but only if I would change my major from geography to, as I said, to nuclear engineering. And I decided not to do that, and so I left Berkeley, and I came back to where my family lived at the moment, which was here in Sacramento, and I started attending something called Sacramento State College, which was what this place used to be called. It was much smaller, fewer buildings, fewer students, but an equal fewer number of parking spaces, so it was still a problem even in those days to park. But and I looked around for a geographer to study with, and lo and behold, I found a man teaching in the geography department here who was also from Singapore, a man of Persian English background who had done a famous study of the boat peoples of Southeast Asia. And so I studied with him. I studied with an anthropology professor here who was on campus, named Tom Williams, who was a student of Margaret Mead, a big 6'2" Welsh football player from Ohio State, who went on to get his doctorate at Syracuse University. And he'd done work on the island of Borneo and got me interested in that. In the middle of all this, I decided that maybe anthropology and geography weren't what I wanted to do. Maybe I wanted to be a musician. I was a clarinet and a sax player, so I majored in music for a while until I found out I couldn't play the piano. I couldn't move one hand separately from the other hand, and after working very hard one semester and getting an F in piano, I decided that I would be just a professional clarinet player and play in symphonies. And after I worked on that for about a year and played in the Sacramento Symphony, would realize that my skills were never going to be up to the level of performing in Philadelphia and other sorts of places. I decided to major in biology, and with the hopes maybe of becoming a physician. And so I took a lot of courses in biology, human anatomy, human physiology, cadaver dissection, and and decided, and then spent some time at the hospital talking to physicians, finding the physicians kind of stupid and not very interesting. I thought, well, maybe I'll go on and study microbiology or some sort of science like that. And then I took a couple more anthropology courses, and they were so much fun. And I did archaeology and stuff. And anthropology was such an easy major because there was no, tiered requirements like there are in the sciences. So ultimately, I graduated from Sac State with a degree in anthropology and a minor in geography and a minor in biology and an awful lot of units in music, but not much of a minor. I decided to continue my interest in Southeast Asian Studies, so I applied for graduate school. I applied to the Centers for Southeast Asian Studies in the United States, which was Yale University and Cornell University, and the University of Chicago, which had kind of a Philippine studies program of a sort. And then I applied to Oregon because I thought it was a really crummy place and I could get in there if I couldn't get anywhere else. And I was very lucky. I was admitted to Chicago and Yale and Cornell. Chicago said they had no fellowship, so I was advised don't go where the money isn't. Yale had a one-year fellowship and Cornell had a three-year fellowship, so I decided, luckily, to go to Cornell, which was a useful thing to have done. So I went to Cornell University. Cornell University is the site of the Center for Asian Studies, their Southeast Asian Studies program. It is the largest Southeast Asian program in the world. The university library collections, which are named after my old language professor, John M. Eccles. The John M. Eccles collection contains 8.5 linear miles of books on Southeast Asia. That is, you stack them up side by side, and they run for 8.5 miles. Okay? Anything written about Southeast Asia is in that library. Anything that is currently written about Southeast Asia gets in that library. So as students there at the university, we had access to all these materials. We had our own desk in the library, and the librarian would come by at night at 2 in the morning, and any books we left there, he would check out to us so we didn't have to waste our time sitting in line and stuff. It was just really nice. And all the newspapers in Southeast Asia were delivered to the library, maybe a week late, but still you could keep up on what was going on in the region. And everybody of significance and importance in the study of Southeast Asia came to Cornell for some brief period of time. So during my first semester there, I took a seminar on Indonesia. All the major leaders of Indonesian studies were sitting around the table at the seminar, and when Ambassador Green, the American ambassador to Indonesia, came home on sabbatical, he spent the first 4 weeks of the sabbatical in Ithaca at the Cornell seminar before he ever went down to Bonnie Bottom and talked to people in the State Department. So it was an absolutely wonderful opportunity for learning about the place. Charles Keyes, the author of the book that we're using this semester, was a fellow student of mine whose specialty was in Thailand and the mainland part of Southeast Asia. He's now a professor of anthropology and Asian studies at the University of Washington. While I was there at Cornell, I was funded under a fellowship from the government, a National Defense Language Fellowship, and so I was able to study and learn the Indonesian language using the Cornell method of teaching language, which is the method which now the U.S. Defense School, language school in Monterey uses, which is to learn a language by learning it with a native speaker of the language in small groups of 4 or 5 students and one native speaker, and you sit there hour after hour face-to-face learning to speak the language. It's the same way that you learn a language from your mother, by looking at his or her face, as it were, and learning to say it. So by the end of the time I was at Cornell, I was a relatively proficient speaker and listener and reader and writer of the national language of the largest country in Southeast Asia, the Republic of Indonesia. Much of Southeast Asian history, however, is written in languages of the colonial period. So if you want to read about the history of Malaya or Burma, you have to read English. If you want to read about the history of Vietnam or Cambodia, you have to read French. And if you want to learn about the history of Indonesia, you have to learn to read Dutch. So I also spent a lot of time learning to read Dutch. I can't speak it at all, but I can read it and understand the material in it. So like most cultural anthropology,